Growing up in Fairhaven, Montana, meant that secrets never stayed buried for long. Halloween 2022 was supposed to be harmless fun for me and my best friend Caleb. We were both 17 then, seniors at Fairhaven High, notorious for pranks that towed the line but never truly crossed it. At least that's what we told ourselves. That October night started like so many others. We met behind Caleb's dad's old barn at 8-in-a-row sharp backpacks, stuffed with toilet paper, glow sticks, and a stash of plastic lawn flamingos we'd been hoarding since summer break. The chill in the air turned our breath into faint ghosts as we cut through backyards, kids in store-bought monster costumes running wild across front lawns. Coach Miller's truck got covered in neon TP within minutes. Mrs. Langley's prized rose bushes were suddenly home to an entire flock of plastic flamingos. Stupid, harmless nothing we hadn't done before. Then Caleb got that look in his eye, the one that always spelled trouble. "Let's hit Granger's place," he whispered. I knew I should have said no. Edward Granger, the so-called neighborhood watch captain, had moved to Fairhaven 5 years ago, and no one ever really liked him. He was an ex-Marine pushing 70, but still built like a brick wall. The rumor was he patrolled the neighborhood every night, jotting down notes in a battered green ledger. Lately, he'd taken to putting up signs: "Trespassers will be prosecuted private property. No exceptions." His house on Birchwood Lane looked like a bunker, security cam spotlights on every gutter, and that ugly wire fence that screamed "keep out." Caleb's plan was simple. TP. The massive elm tree in Granger's front yard, scatter the flamingos doing indecent things, and maybe plant a few plastic tombstones with dumb jokes. Stupid juvenile, exactly our brand. We slipped through a narrow alley behind the neighbor's tool shed to dodge the obvious cameras. The first thing that struck me was how dark Granger's yard was. No porch light, no glaring motion sensors, just an unnatural, heavy kind of dark. Caleb nudged me, grin wide. "Finally fell asleep, huh?" But the silence made my teeth itch. We ducked under the fence and stayed low. My foot brushed something that rattled my flashlight, caught a wire stretched tight, knee-high. Attached to rusty cans filled with God knows what. I hissed for Caleb to stop, but he was already stepping over, whispering, "Relax." We moved slow, dodging more wires, nails, hidden under piles of damp leaves. I spotted what looked too much like a real steel trap, and prayed it was a fake from a hunting shop. The moon offered just enough light to see the outline of Granger's front porch, and that's when I realized we weren't alone. He was sitting dead center in a battered lawn chair, half swallowed by shadows. I only saw the outline at first, but then the moonlight caught the dull metal across his knees, a shotgun resting in his lap like it belonged there. Caleb saw him too, his breath catching in his throat. We froze in place, surrounded by tripwires and God knows what else. Granger didn't move, but his head tilted, slow, deliberate. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of a camo cap, but I swear I felt them pinning me to the grass. The barrel of the shotgun twitched slightly, then his voice cut through the cold air, low, steady, and far too calm. "Evening, boys. Been waiting on you." My throat closed up. Caleb's hand trembled against my arm. Granger rose, unfolding himself like some nightmare puppet, the porch boards groaning under his boots. He stepped forward, face half painted in greasy camo lines. The shotgun came up just a hair, not quite aiming, but not resting either. "You think this is funny, trespass and spying?" he said, almost conversational, like he was asking about the weather. "You know what we did to spies back then?" My brain refused to keep up. The back Then wasn't last year, it was somewhere deep in a jungle he never really left behind. I heard the soft click of the shotgun's safety. "Sir, we're sorry." I tried voice cracking like I was 12 again. "We were just gonna decorate your yard." That's all. Granger's head cocked sideways, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. Then he stepped down from the porch. I smelled him before I felt him. Gun oil, stale cigarettes, something sharp and medicinal. He looked straight through us, eyes unfocused. "Recon team, huh? Send the boys in ahead. Think I wouldn't set perimeter." His words slurred into some distant time and place. Caleb did the stupidest thing I've ever seen him do. He bolted left, aiming for the back gate. He didn't make it 2 steps before he snagged a wire. The yard erupted with the clang of metal cans, a metallic rain that made Granger's grin twitch wide. Caleb went down hard, yelping when his leg slammed into a plank studded with nails. Granger's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Told him, no one gets past the wire." He lifted the shotgun and pointed it right at Caleb's chest. I heard my own pulse roaring in my ears. I dropped to my knees next to my friend, fumbling for my phone with numb fingers. 911. No time to explain, just prayed they'd hear the chaos. Granger's boots crunched closer. "You got 2 options. Sit real still while I figure out which unit you're with, or run again and see what happens when you hit the second line." Caleb whimpered, blood soaking his jeans. The old man stepped closer, whispering something about Charlie and the wire and holding the line. A faint crackle made me look up. Hidden speakers in the hedges were pumping out crackling jungle noise insects and faint gunfire. This wasn't about guarding his yard. This was his war bleeding through the fence and into our stupid prank. A siren in the distance. God, I'd never loved cops more than in that second, but the wail seemed to break him further. Granger barked orders to ghosts spinning around with the shotgun. I dragged Caleb upright, dead weight leaning hard into my shoulder. "Get up, now." The muzzle swung back our way. "Deserters." Granger howled. "Nobody breaks rank." The shotgun exploded, the blast tearing through the night, splintering the fence inches from my head. Another deafening boom shattered the window of a minivan parked on the curb. Red and blue lights washed over us as we stumbled forward, just as 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop at the curb. Doors flung open. Shouts. "Drop the weapon." Now for a heartbeat, I thought he'd turn the shotgun on them. But something flickered behind his eyes, fear or maybe just a moment of clarity, and the gun fell from his hands. They took him away in cuffs, still mumbling about securing sectors and covering exits. Caleb was whisked off by EMTs, the cops taking my statement, while I stared at the patchy grass, still littered with our cheap plastic flamingos. They found Granger's basement rigged like a command bunker. Dozens of monitors, maps with color-coded lines for kill zones, a whole arsenal of makeshift traps. The news said PTSD untreated for years. No prison, just a locked ward somewhere far away. Caleb and I drifted apart after graduation. Never pulled another prank. Never wanted to. Now every Halloween when I see kids draped in capes and rubber masks running through the night, I wonder if they know. Some monsters don't wear costumes. Some just wait for you to cross their wire. Do you still think about the line between harmless fun and something much darker? Tell me, would you have run or just stayed frozen? Drop your thoughts below. I'll be watching. Working as a reporter in a quiet corner of northern Michigan, wasn't exactly the dream I had when I first framed my journalism degree on my bedroom wall. But by the time I turned 31, Marquette had wrapped itself around me, the kind of small lakeside town where you greet the same people every morning at the diner and your editor's been your neighbor since high school. I'd been writing local filler for the Marquette Ledger since late 2020, softball tournaments, fishing competitions, the odd city council squabble that never went anywhere. Nothing worth national ink. Until the morning that folder landed on my desk, the day everything changed. It was a muggy Wednesday in early September when my editor, Ron, slapped a battered manila envelope next to my cold coffee and said only, "You're gonna want this." The Lakeview Rest Facility had closed down overnight. No prior notice, no public statement. Just a scribbled sign taped to the front door at dawn, while bewildered families arrived to find the place fenced off and their parents or grandparents carted away in unmarked vans to homes 3 counties over. Ron wanted 400 safe words on the closure and a quick list of where everyone went. But my gut told me something rotten lay buried under Lakeview's fresh coat of cheerful blue paint. I'd driven past that building dozens of times on my way to chase up puff pieces about snowmobile festivals or the winter ice sculptures on 3rd Street. From the street, Lakeview looked pleasant flower beds under every window, a small garden where volunteers planted tulips in the spring. But less than 12 hours after it closed, the windows were covered in plywood, and a chain-link fence with bright orange hazard tape had sprung up around the grounds. Who seals off a building that fast if they're not hiding something? By noon that day, I'd called every department in the state I could think of. The county health office swore they'd filed no orders to shut Lakeview down. The mayor's office bounced me to the corporate owner Northwind Elder Care, but their receptionist kept me on hold until my phone battery died. Every time I got close to an answer, the line went cold. I'd almost given up when I met Marian Phillips sitting on her sun porch with an old knitted blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Marian's mother, Lillian, had been at Lakeview for nearly 6 years. Marian showed me the last voicemail she'd ever gotten from her mother 3 weeks before the shutdown. A brittle voice, barely a whisper, begging her to please come get me. They're doing things at night. The next day when Marian visited, Lillian didn't remember the call at all. The administrator, some stone-faced man named Caldwell, brushed it off as confusion and handed Marian a folder of updated treatment notes. Marian had believed him until the closure. She slid a cracked envelope across her kitchen table. Inside were 5 photos Lillian had somehow snapped with a disposable camera Marian had given her for Christmas. They were fuzzy shadows creeping across sterile linoleum floors under harsh fluorescent light. The first showed an old man strapped down by belts that looked more suited to a warehouse than a nursing home. Another showed something thicker patients being fed some gray sludge from unlabeled plastic containers by staff in full aprons and goggles. The final photo was of Lillian herself standing in a dim hallway pointing at a steel door, stenciled with a biohazard sign. On the back, in shaky pen, she'd written, "Down here, when they don't get better." No one comes back up. I drove back to the Ledger that night with the photos burning a hole in my backpack. I knew this was no longer about some sudden closure or overdue inspection. Something else had crawled under Lakeview's paint and tidy flower beds, something that smelled like rot and chemicals. And someone clearly wanted it buried for good. I spent that night digitizing the pictures, stashing copies on thumb drives I hid in the bottom of my sock drawer. At 10:30, I nearly jumped out of my chair when I spotted a car idling across the street from the newsroom, an unremarkable black SUV, the same one I'd seen parked near Marion's house that afternoon. Headlights off, just sitting there. An hour later, someone knocked on the front door of the Ledger's dark lobby. I peered through the glass and found a young man, maybe my age, wearing faded scrubs and shifting nervously. His name was Devin Lee, a night shift nurse who'd left Lakeview 6 weeks ago. "I heard you're asking questions," he said, voice hoarse. "I can't live with it anymore." We sat in the break room while the overhead lights flickered. Devin told me Lakeview wasn't just an ordinary care facility. It was a test site, something called Operation Blue Ember. They told staff it was a dementia study funded by a hush-hush pharma lab in Chicago. They gave the residents cognitive enhancement trials at night. Except the side effects, he stopped glancing over his shoulder at the creaking hallway. Some patients got aggressive, others just empty, not even themselves anymore. If they resisted, they were taken downstairs. After that, nobody saw them again. Devin promised he had records copies of intake logs, supply orders, coded medical charts. We arranged to meet at a highway rest stop outside Escanaba at 7 a.m. He never made it. By the time I got there, his beat-up sedan sat under a flickering streetlight engine, idling driver's door wide open. Devin's backpack was still on the passenger seat, a folder marked Lakeview Intake peeking out. But Devin himself was gone. Security cam footage later showed him stepping toward a white van that rolled up beside him, then nothing. Inside the folder were patient files marked by serial numbers instead of names, shipment receipts for crates of unmarked vials, and a log of transfers that didn't match any standard medical relocation. Cross-checking those IDs against local obituaries made my stomach clench. Every name ended in the same way died within weeks of a transfer, the certificates all signed by the same attending physician, Dr. Samuel Caldwell. By sunset that day, my phone buzzed with threats. First, my tires were sliced to ribbons while I was in the public library. Then came the calls, no words, just raspy breathing, and a faint mechanical beep, like a heart monitor out of sync. But the real gut punch was the small box left on my porch the next dawn. Inside, a photo of me standing alone at that Escanaba rest stop, plus a single gray pill sealed in plastic. The note read, "Stop digging or swallow this next." I could have handed it all over right then, but I kept seeing Marion's eyes and Lillian's desperate scrawl on the back of that final photo. So instead, I called my cousin Ethan, a roofer once arrested for bar brawls, now mostly stayed out of trouble, and he owed me big from covering his sorry story 2 winters back. We parked 2 blocks from Lakeview's chain link fence just before midnight. One floodlight glowed in the basement window, the only light left on in the entire building. We found a side door half secured by a busted lock. Inside smelled like antiseptic and something foul underneath it, wet metal and old sweat. The halls were frozen in time, wheelchairs lined up like ghosts, old paintings of wildflowers staring blankly as we slipped by. Downstairs, the cold turned sharp. We found ourselves in a maze of white-tiled chambers and gurneys wires still dangling like veins from abandoned machines. Ethan opened a steel cabinet marked Samples. Vials inside cloudy fluid swirling in the flickering light. A battered logbook sat on a rusted cart. The last pages were worse than the photos, coded subjects, injections notes about unexpected tissue, regrowth, severe psychosis, and containment protocols. The final line, subjects U09, 22, and 34 status unknown basement hold. I heard it then, the slow drag of feet on concrete, a dry wheeze. We froze. The figure that appeared in the hall was once a man, I think. Gray skin stretched over sharp bones, eyes pale as candle wax. He lurched mouth open, a sound like wet paper tearing in his throat. Two more shapes shuffled behind him, all hospital gowns and medical bracelets that caught the weak light. We ran. Through that maze, up the cracked stairs, the echo of those steps scraping behind us. We didn't look back until Ethan's truck pulled away from the chain-link fence. In the rearview mirror, I swear I saw them, three figures pressed against the fence, eyes dead white, watching us vanish. I didn't go back to the ledger. I went straight to the FBI's satellite office in Traverse City. They took every photo, every file, every stolen vial. They found the basement just as we'd left it, and the survivors, if you could call them that. Caldwell's therapy was an unregistered serum meant to trigger radical brain regeneration. The reality was irreversible damage, minds wiped blank or replaced by something monstrous. Dr. Caldwell was arrested days later trying to board a charter flight to Toronto. Northwind Elder Care turned out to be a shell, a cutout for offshore accounts funding black market human testing. Devin Lee was found barely alive in an abandoned motel 2 counties south, drugged but breathing. The basement residents, what was left of them, were taken to a CDC containment ward. No one talks about what the doctors found in their blood. The story broke wide 2 weeks later. I got my byline in every major paper I'd once dreamed of writing for. They gave me an award for courage in investigative journalism. But every time someone congratulates me, I see those eyes at the fence, blank and endless. 6 months later, they paved over the land where Lakeview stood, poured concrete, laid out a little garden with plaques etched with the names they could confirm. Sometimes I stand there with fresh flowers for Lillian Phillips, and I wonder how many secrets still sleep under the ground. I still file stories, small ones, town fairs, road closures. But when I pass any place with too many locked doors and too few questions, my stomach turns. Because once you've seen what they hide behind bright paint and flower beds, you never stop seeing it. And if you made it this far, tell me, would you have opened that basement door? Drop your answer below. I'll be reading, especially after dark. People sometimes wonder why I vanished from Mill Hollow overnight, why I abandoned a steady job, ghosted my college friends, and never spoke a word about what drove me out in the spring of 2019. The nightmares haven't stopped. Maybe writing this will finally quiet them. I was 23 then, working graveyard shifts at Callahan's 24-hour market to scrape together tuition for classes at the local community college. Mill Hollow, Oregon population, 3,600, was the kind of quiet logging town where gossip moved faster than traffic, and the biggest scandal was usually someone's dog knocking over Mrs. Ellison's prized garden gnomes. I'd grown up there, knew every family tree, every bar fight, every secret that folks pretended wasn't common knowledge. Except the Lockwood secrets, those were locked away behind smiles and iron fences. The Lockwoods ran Mill Hollow. Marshall Lockwood had been mayor since I was in middle school. His sawmill paid half the town's rent. His wife Irene ran every church fundraiser and charity ball. Their son, Caleb, was the All-American Golden Boy senior at Mill Hollow High Star quarterback, top of his class, the kind of kid who got second chances before he ever needed one. I'd graduated 2 years ahead of his older sister Harper, who'd vanished into an Ivy League campus and only came back for Christmas photos. Even back then, the Lockwoods felt like local royalty, untouchable, polished, insulated from the rest of us who waited for paychecks to clear. Marshall had a black Lincoln Navigator, Irene drove a spotless, white Mercedes SUV, and Caleb had just been gifted a new silver Camaro for his 18th birthday. Wednesday night, March 13th, 2019, half through my shift, I heard the sound that would end any chance I'd stay in Mill Hollow. Callahan sits right on the corner of Main and Alder, big glass windows that look out over the whole sleepy stretch of downtown. It was just past 11:20 p.m. The freezers humming behind me were louder than the street outside. I was kneeling in aisle 4 refilling gum and breath mints when the quiet cracked open tires screeching against wet pavement, then a horrible smack that sounded like fruit dropped from a rooftop. I spun around in time to see brake lights flash a silver Camaro tearing through the intersection, then disappearing uphill toward the big houses on Timbercrest Drive. My stomach turned because there was only one new Camaro in Mill Hollow Caleb's. Sprawled in the crosswalk was someone who hadn't been there seconds before. A man crumpled unnaturally under the street lamp glow. It was Mr. Barlow, 70, retired janitor from the high school, harmless old man who always bought the same pack of menthols every Friday. He'd probably been walking home like he always did. Now, he wasn't going anywhere. I called 911 with fingers that didn't feel like mine, voice shaking so hard I barely got the words out. But I didn't mention the car. Not yet. Not until I was sure. Not until I figured out what it meant to say out loud that the mayor's son had just killed someone and kept driving. It didn't take long for the ambulance to arrive, lights painting Main Street red and blue. Chief Gordon showed up minutes later, all grim eyes and hushed talk with his deputy Ruiz. But by the time they zipped Mr. Barlow into a black bag, the black Lincoln was already there. Mayor Lockwood stepped out like he'd been waiting all evening in that perfectly pressed suit. He didn't glance at the body. He didn't ask me a single question. He went straight to Gordon. I watched them talk in shadows near the squad car, voices, low glances darting my way. Lockwood pulled out his phone, one hand buried in his coat pocket, voice calm and flat like he was reciting a grocery list. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. When Gordon turned back to Ruiz, I saw him gesture to the evidence bag, shake his head once. The deputy quietly closed his notepad and tucked it away. At 1 a.m., while Ruiz was still pretending to measure skid marks that didn't exist, a tow truck showed up. Not Ray's Garage, our local guy, but some outfit from 3 towns south. It backed into the alley behind the courthouse and rolled out with a wrecked silver car hidden under tarps. Even in the flickering streetlight, I saw enough: the crumpled fender, the dangling headlight, a splash of something dark that made my stomach twist. Nobody asked questions. Nobody stopped the truck as it rumbled away. Lockwood stayed behind the wheel of his Lincoln phone to his ear eyes on the tow rig until it vanished. At 2:15, the intersection looked exactly the way it had before Mr. Barlow's last walk. No chalk, no tape, no story. By morning, the Mill Hollow Chronicle buried it in a single paragraph on page 5. Local man tragically collapses near Alder Crosswalk. No mention of any vehicle. No plea for witnesses. Just a freak accident. The next few days taught me exactly how deep the roots of the Lockwoods' power ran. Mr. Barlow's funeral was all photo ops, Irene with her crocodile tears, Marshall delivering a sermon on community grief, Caleb standing stone-faced in a borrowed black suit. I noticed the bruise on his temple half hidden by hair that hadn't seen a comb. I noticed how he wouldn't meet my eyes. 1 week later, I found the first warning waiting on the store floor when I opened up. A plain envelope, no stamp, just my name scrawled in neat block letters. Inside a photo of me talking to Ruiz that night, snapped through the window. On the back, keep it buried. I should have gone to the police, but the police were the reason I couldn't. Gordon's guilty shuffle, Ruiz's forced smile. The second message came 3 days later. My apartment door ajar when I got home, every light off. Inside, nothing stolen, but everything touched. My drawers rearranged. My textbooks flipped open on the table. On my pillow, a copy of my class schedule and bank statement. A note ink neat and sharp. Curiosity kills more than cats. I slept on the couch that night with a baseball bat across my chest. Like an idiot, I told Lena Bell my shift buddy-born gossip heart too big for her own good. She listened wide-eyed, then dragged me into the back room where the cameras didn't reach. Her cousin Benny worked night shifts at Mill Hollow Auto. He'd told her about a hush-hush repair, a silver Camaro front end demolished rolled in after hours under a tarp, cash paid up front. No invoice, no paper trail. By sunrise, it was gone. 2 days later, Lena was fired for cash register discrepancies. Benny got laid off for sleeping on the job. His next 2 applications vanished before interviews. The third message wasn't paper. It was Marshall Lockwood himself gliding into Callahan's wearing that politician grin that made my stomach crawl. He asked about my classes, my family, how proud he was of local boys with ambition. Then he leaned in close enough I smelled his cologne. Sometimes he said it's best to focus on your future, not the past, or other people's mistakes. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Neither did the threat. That night, a black Lincoln idled across from my building for hours. I left town the next morning, drove to my cousin's place near Eugene, and stayed 3 days sleeping with a knife under my pillow. When I crawled back to Mill Hollow, the walls had already closed in. My shifts cut in half, my professors cold and distant. My landlord politely suggested maybe I'd outgrown this little place. Even my neighbors wouldn't look me in the eye. I saw Caleb one last time at the Shell station. He stepped in front of me, voice too loud, buddies snickering behind him. "Hey, you're that guy telling ghost stories about my family, right?" His smile was thin. His eyes said, "Don't." I got it. A week later, my car windshield shattered like sugar glass. On the seat, a news clipping about a kid who'd accidentally driven off a cliff at night. One sentence highlighted in yellow. I called Gordon. Ruiz showed up. He didn't even bother writing it down. I didn't wait for the fourth message. I took the scholarship that arrived from the Mill Hollow Civic Betterment Fund, a program that hadn't existed until the day I got the envelope co-signed by Irene Lockwood herself. I packed my life into a single bag and left before sunrise, windows down, music loud enough to drown out the phantom footsteps I swore I heard behind me. I don't tell this story to anyone in Mill Hollow. I don't go back. I don't check Facebook when someone says Caleb's engaged, or when Marshall smiles for campaign posters. I don't want to know. But some nights I still hear the tires screech. I still see the brake lights. I still wonder what they'd have done if I'd stayed. And if you're reading this, if you ever see something you're not supposed to ask yourself one thing before you speak up, would you risk your whole life to be right? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading, especially after midnight. I never looked at my hometown the same way after the fall of 2019. Back then, I was 17, picking up shifts at my cousin's feed store in Pine Hollow, Wyoming. Population just under 2,500. The kind of place where everybody waves whether they know you or not. Where the biggest gossip is who's bringing the best pie to the harvest fair. My best friend Jonah and I had spent our entire childhoods there, riding bikes down dirt roads and skipping rocks at Miller's Pond. And since we could talk, we'd been told the same thing by every grown-up we trusted. Don't mess around past the old quarry line. If you did, you didn't talk about it. Nobody ever said why. That Saturday was meant to be normal. I clocked out of work at 3:30. Jonah swung by in his battered Ford Ranger. We were going to crash at his place, order pizza, maybe catch a game. But as we cruised down Maple Street, we spotted Pastor O'Connor's pickup parked half-hidden behind St. Jude's Chapel, the rear bumper draped with a faded army blanket. I remember looking at Jonah. He didn't say a word, just turned the wheel and slid us into the laundromat lot across the street. Something was up. After 17 years of being told not to ask, we finally asked. We waited until the sun slipped behind the foothills, leaving the sky bruised purple. The old maintenance path beside the chapel hadn't changed since catechism class. Same broken gate panel you could wiggle through if you knew where to press. We ducked inside, moving slow, the dry weeds brushing against our jeans. The air smelled of pine needles and damp iron like a busted water pipe left to rust in the dirt. That's when we heard it, a layered murmur floating out from the trees behind the chapel's storage yard. Not singing, chanting. Low repetitive, too many voices blending together. I felt it in my ribs before I could even understand it. The path was clearer than it had any right to be, fresh ruts in the soil, branches trimmed back like someone tended it carefully. Jonah squeezed my wrist when the first lantern came into view. A glass oil lamp swinging from a pine branch light, flickering shadows that jittered along the trunks. Then another, and another. A breadcrumb trail of flame pulling us deeper than we'd ever dared. We crept along the edges, hearts beating loud in the hush. The chanting rose and fell like a tide echoing between the trees. I caught bits of words, but they felt wrong in my mouth, rough, ancient, half-growled. When we found the clearing, my knees nearly buckled. Lanterns ringed a stone slab at the center, glowing symbols carved into its surface, shifting with the lamplight like they were alive. Around it, at least 40 people stood shoulder to shoulder, robes dyed the brown red of dried blood faces, buried under masks that looked like nightmares. Some sprouted horns or bone antlers, others were painted with too many eyes, crooked mouths twisted in cruel smiles. Through the circle, 3 figures stepped forward, dragging something limp between them. I thought it was a prop, at first a dummy for some sick ritual play. Then it shifted and my stomach dropped. It was a man, maybe in his 20s, wearing a white shirt soaked dark around the collar. A burlap sack covered his head, his feet dragging ruts through the pine needles. They laid him on the slab, and the chanting cut off, so sudden, my ears rang with the emptiness. One masked figure stepped up, pulling something from their cloak, a curved blade, silver, and etched with the same crawling symbols that danced across the stone. They lifted it, high blade, catching the lantern glow. I was ready for the worst, but the figure didn't strike. Instead, they sliced the sack clean off. Beneath it, the man's eyes stared open-glazed and wrong, like he wasn't really seeing any of us. The leader's voice boomed plain English, but so loud it felt wrong in that hush. "Daniel Price, you bear the burden tonight. You will stand in both worlds. You will remember what we need remembering." The man's lips moved, echoing back words that didn't belong to him. The symbols on the stone flickered to life, pulsing bright enough to wash out the lanterns. The air grew heavy, humming, like the seconds before lightning strikes. The robed crowd swayed together, and my eyes caught a glint on a masked hand, a gold-class ring identical to the one Jonah wore. My stomach twisted tight. That's when Jonah stepped backward, crunching a twig under his boot. The snap cracked through the clearing like a gunshot. 40 heads turned at once, every mask frozen on us like we were insects pinned under glass. The blade lowered. The chanting stopped. And then the leader spoke, voice cold enough to frost my bones. "Brothers, sisters, witnesses to our vow." Figures broke from the ring, slipping between trunks with robes brushing brambles. We didn't wait. We bolted the night, exploding with rustling cloth and snapping branches behind us. The woods swallowed our shouts and stumbling feet. Lantern light flickered in the corners of my vision like angry eyes. I heard their calls, sharp-coded, practiced. They weren't chasing kids. They were hunting prey. We tore out through the tree line by the quarry fence, feet skidding on loose gravel. Jonah's truck was a dim promise under the streetlight 3 lots away, but then headlights flared to life behind the chapel. Engines revved, tires spun over loose stone. They were coming to box us in. That's when old Mr. Callahan, the groundskeeper who smoked behind the parish hall every Sunday, stepped out from behind the maintenance shed, keys dangling in his fist. "Boys in the van. Now." We didn't question it. We scrambled into the back of his battered county van, landing in a pile of leaf bags and bleach buckets. Mr. Callahan slammed the door, gunned the engine, and took back roads I swear I'd never seen on any map. He kept checking the mirror, muttering curses under his breath. 40 years I've kept kids out of those damn trees. 40 years. You shouldn't have seen that. He dropped us by the old truck stop on the highway outside town. Handed us a handful of cash and a slip of paper with a number scratched in block letters. "My brother got out in '88. Call him if you run. Don't look back. Don't tell a soul." Jonah and I didn't go home that night. We called our folks 2 states away, feeding them a half-made story about blowing off steam. The official word was, we'd stolen the truck driven too far, got scared. They grounded us for a month. They were just glad we came back alive. We never did, really. We left Pine Hollow for good. New names, new schools, new stories. But the feed store's Facebook page still pops up sometimes. Small town updates, new bank branch opening, new faces on the council. Jonah found an article once. Daniel Price, new manager at First Pine Savings. A picture of him at the ribbon cutting, smiling too wide, standing beside Pastor O'Connor and Mrs. Mallory, my old civics teacher. His eyes looked clear, but that smile. Callahan still messages every once in a while. Same text every time stay out. They don't forget. And we do. We stay out. But some nights when sleep won't come, I wonder who's out there under those pine trees now, whispering old words in the dark, carving the next outsider into something that looks like one of us. Running at night used to be my thing. Ever since college, when the world was too loud during the day, the empty streets became my sanctuary. After my messy breakup last spring, it was my one ritual that made sense. Living in Willow Bay, a quiet little coastal town in northern Oregon where everyone waves but nobody really knows each other, meant the streets turned ghostly after 900 p.m. Perfect for someone like me, working 12-hour shifts at the city hospital, who could only breathe when everyone else was asleep. At 31, I was in the best shape of my life, training for the Portland Marathon, pushing my legs through these dim streets, lined with salt-stung cottages and weather-beaten porches. I'd run the same loop for almost 4 years down Cedar Street around the old pier, then through the residential blocks, where century-old houses leaned under the weight of coastal storms. There was comfort in repetition, the hush of the ocean wind, the steady drum of my sneakers on cracked pavement, the soft pools of gold under each street lamp. It made the chaos of the ER feel far away. The first time I saw that battered old truck was a Wednesday night in late October 2023. It was unusually warm for Oregon that time of year, one of those nights where the breeze off the bay smelled more like spring than fall. I'd just hit the 2-mile mark on Birch Avenue when I caught headlights in my peripheral vision. They drifted behind me, too slow for that road, maybe 10, 12 miles an hour. I turned my head just enough to see a dented gray Dodge, probably early 2000s. The driver's side was hidden from me, but the way the truck crawled along my pace like it was matching my footfalls made something tighten under my ribs. I tried to laugh it off. People get lost in Willow Bay all the time. Or maybe it was some old fisherman heading home from the dock. Paranoia is a small-town disease. By the time I swung onto the pier loop, the truck was gone, just the sound of my breathing and the slap of my shoes against damp wood. The next night, Thursday, I'd had one of those rare shifts that didn't bleed me dry. I changed into my neon orange shorts, the ones my brother Evan always teased me about, said they made me look like I'd escaped a construction site and headed out just before 11:00 p.m. The temperature had dipped a sharp bite riding the wind off the bay. About 1.5 miles in near the old cannery that's been boarded up longer than I've been alive, I heard that engine again. A low, irregular growl diesel, maybe. I looked back, and there it was. Same Dodge headlights off this time, just those dim, running lights, casting a faint, sickly glow. It drifted behind me, like a shark, steady and silent, except for the grumble of the motor. I turned onto Pine Hollow Road, a back way I almost never used, half hoping I was imagining it. But the truck followed, never speeding up, never lagging, just there. Pine Hollow has barely any lights, just a few porch bulbs, and the green glow of a single gas station sign way down at the corner. Trees crowded in on both sides, branches scraping overhead like skeletal fingers. I picked up my pace until my lungs burned. The truck kept its distance. By the time I hit the end of Pine Hollow, I made myself a promise. If it turned right after me, I'd knock on the door of the 24-hour diner on Harbor Road and wait it out. But when I veered right, the truck drifted straight, vanishing into the patchwork of side streets that snake through Willow Bay's oldest blocks. Friday, I told myself not to run, but the walls of my apartment felt too small. By 10:00 p.m., I was lacing up my shoes, phone fully charged in my pocket, telling myself I wouldn't be scared off by a rusty truck and my overactive imagination. I switched up my route, started down Alder Lane instead of Cedar. For 20 minutes, it was just me and the wind, my breath turning to mist in the cold, the hush of the ocean just out of sight. until I saw it again idling under a busted streetlight at the edge of Seagrass Park. Same truck, engine on exhaust coiling into the cold, parked in the exact spot where anyone heading north would have to pass. I slowed, every instinct telling me to turn around, but the other half of me refused. I jogged past, trying to look as casual as possible, while my pulse thundered in my ears. As I passed the engine, revved just once low and deliberate, like a wordless hello. I didn't look back, but I heard it ease off the curb and fall in behind me, the distance too perfect to be chance. Every step felt like it might be the last time my feet touched pavement. Saturday night, I cracked. I called Evan, asked him to keep his phone on to wait for my check-ins every 15 minutes. He told me to skip it, come over, watch terrible horror movies like we used to. But stubbornness can feel like courage when you're alone. I started early, a few minutes before 10 dinners, telling myself the more people out, the less likely anything would happen. But the streets felt like a stage, empty houses, hollow windows, and me under the streetlights like a spotlight. It didn't take long. 5 blocks and headlights cut through the dark. This time, they weren't behind me, they were coming head-on. The Dodge crept closer, high beams up, full blast. At about 40 feet, it veered, suddenly drifting across the yellow line, forcing me off the shoulder and onto a narrow strip of frozen grass. I stumbled over a planter I'd run past 100 times, but never noticed until my shin cracked against it. The truck didn't stop. It coasted by like I was invisible. I stood there, doubled over my breath, making frantic clouds while my brain screamed, "This isn't random anymore." Sunday, I went to the hardware store, bought pepper spray, and lied to the old guy behind the counter, told him it was just for late-night dog walks. He looked at me like he didn't believe a word. I spent the day rehearsing what I'd say to the cops. How do you report someone who never says a word, never breaks the law, just stalks your nights until you wish for daylight, like a prayer? At 9, I pulled my hood-up phone-charged pepper spray in my fist. I chose the brightest route straight through the heart of Willow Bay, past the fire station. The one diner, the bait shop that smells like brine and diesel. But the Dodge was there before I even reached the corner, idling under a streetlight that flickered like a dying pulse. I had to pass it. No other way to get to town. As I approached the driver's window, rolled down halfway. I couldn't see the face, just the void where eyes should be a faint orange glow of a cigarette tip maybe. Then a voice, rough, scraping at the edges. "Nice night for a jog, huh?" It wasn't threatening. It was worse. It was hungry. I kept moving my shoes, hitting the cracked sidewalk faster than my brain could process. A block later, the truck's engine coughed to life behind me, not creeping this time, roaring tires spitting gravel. I turned just as headlights flared too close, too fast. No sidewalk here, just a muddy ditch tangled with blackberry brambles. Instinct took over. I dove the thorns, ripping my leggings, scratching fire across my arms. The truck roared past so close I felt the hot slap of exhaust on my cheek. I thought it was over, but brakes squealed, tires bit asphalt, and that guttural engine reversed. Backing up slow, now crawling toward the ditch like a final promise. I couldn't see my phone. Somewhere out there in the road lit up with a missed call from Evan. The door creaked open, boots on gravel. He knew I was here. He wanted me to know that. Then salvation, a pair of headlights bending around the corner. Old Mr. Kernan's rusted-out station wagon coming home from poker night at the VFW. He must have seen my phone in the road, maybe saw my silhouette half buried in thorns. The boots on gravel turned quick, the truck door slammed, and by the time Mr. Kernan reached me, the Dodge's taillights were already bleeding away into the dark. 2 days later, they found the truck in a ravine outside Tillamook, stripped, abandoned, no fingerprints worth a damn. Stolen weeks earlier, states away. I moved to Portland 6 weeks later. Got a new job, new apartment, new excuses for why I only run in daylight now. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there haunting back roads in another borrowed truck waiting for another woman stubborn enough to believe she's safe under streetlights. I try not to think about it, but on nights when sleep won't come and I catch my reflection in the dark window, I still listen for the low growl of a truck engine under my heartbeat. The ink on my custody papers hadn't even dried when Aunt Carol called me about the old hardware shop. My name's Tyler Hughes. I'm 36, and for a while I thought I'd done everything right. Good job, family. The white picket fence life they promise you if you work hard enough. But when my marriage imploded last spring, the fence came down with it. The house got sold off my weekends with Ethan, and Lily shrank to 2 precious days out of 14, and the silence in my empty apartment felt like punishment for failing at something I once thought was forever. So when Aunt Carol offered me the chance to take over her late husband's hardware store in a place called Ash Hollow, I said yes, before I'd even looked at a map. Ash Hollow was small enough that people still waved at each other on Main Street, and rent didn't drain every dime I had left after legal fees. I loaded my dusty Ford Ranger with the essentials, some clothes, my toolbox, my coffee maker, and drove 9 hours north from Tucson, hoping this forgotten town would help stitch my life back together. At first it did. Hughes Hardware sat between a rundown bakery and an old barber's shop, with one of those vintage striped poles that spun lazily day and night. The store itself smelled like oiled wood and sawdust floors that creaked with every step, shelves stacked neat as a pin, with screws bolts. Garden hoses paint cans in rows like soldiers waiting for orders. I'd open up at 6:30 sharp, make coffee in the back office under the hum of old fluorescents, and spend my days helping locals fix fences, patch roofs, replace busted lawnmower blades. For a man who felt broken, there was comfort in simple repairs. Then I saw him. Tall, probably 6'4", with greasy black hair that hung limp around his narrow face. His clothes were a size too big, the hems dragging over scuffed work boots. He'd shuffle in most days just before lunch, never bought a thing, just drifted from aisle to aisle, muttering to himself in this scratchy nasal tone that made my skin crawl. He'd pick up random things, a pack of nails, a socket wrench, turn them over in his bony hands like he was reading some secret message, then abandon them wherever he felt like. I'd find garden shears dumped next to spray paint PVC pipe, leaning against the cash register. He was harmless, I told myself at first. Just lonely. Or touched in the head. But the rambling stories got weirder. He'd trap me behind the counter and drone on about black helicopters flying over the hills, how the local water tower was a cover for a government listening station, how this hardware store. My hardware store was built over a burial site for miners who'd never left. I tried to be polite, kept my answers short, nodded when he leaned in too close. His breath reeked of stale coffee and copper like old coins left in a hot car. Customers noticed. Some would wait awkwardly. Others would glance at him, then back at me with pity before walking out without buying a thing. It all snapped on a Wednesday afternoon. He spent nearly an hour blocking the main aisle, ranting about how he'd memorized my routine. When I opened, when I closed, when I stepped out for lunch. He said it like he was proud, like I should be impressed. That night, I lay awake listening to every creak in my tiny rented house 3 blocks away, wondering if he was out there standing under my bedroom window. Friday morning, when he shuffled in again, I finally did what I should have done weeks earlier. I stepped out from behind the counter and told him straight. He was welcome to browse, but if he wasn't going to buy, he needed to move along. Other people needed my help, and I couldn't have him scaring them away. He stared at me for a heartbeat, those watery gray eyes suddenly sharp, then gave this crooked grin that didn't reach his eyes. Without a word, he turned and pushed the door open so hard the bell above it snapped clean off. I thought that was the end of it. I even felt good about standing my ground until my phone rang at 12:16 that night. No caller ID, just breathing. Slow and raspy like someone struggling not to laugh. Then the line went dead. Saturday morning 6 missed calls. Same time frame, midnight to 4. No messages, just silence. The next night it wasn't breathing. It was whispering. Words I couldn't catch just enough to keep me frozen there, clutching the phone like it might bite me. I unplugged the landline. Didn't matter. By Tuesday, the calls started coming to my cell. Wednesday morning, I found a note wedged under the store's back door. Cheap lined paper. Red ink, shaky scrawl, you shouldn't have done that. Below it, my new address. Every number correct. A chill ran through my spine that no cup of stale break room coffee could fix. I told myself it was a bluff. Then came the next note. This time he named my kids. Ethan likes gummy bears. Lily wears pink shoes. I thought I might throw up right there on the stockroom floor. He'd seen them. Maybe followed them while they held my hands on Main Street. I called my ex Clara, babbling into her voicemail until she finally picked up. She didn't believe me until I read the note word for word. Suddenly we were on the same side again. She kept them inside, drove them to school herself, but I couldn't shake the image of that lanky shadow watching from some corner of town I couldn't see. By Friday, he'd slashed my truck's tires, scratched crude eyes into the paint, gouged so deep it cut through the primer. I called Ash Hollow PD. Officer Sanderson took a report like he was bored, handed me a flimsy card with a non-emergency number, and told me to keep an eye out. Sunday night, my phone rang. Clara's name on the screen. But the voice wasn't hers. That nasal drawl crawled into my ear like a worm. They're at the playground behind Lincoln School. Lily's got her pink shoes. Ethan's got gummy bears. Accidents happen, you know. Click. I didn't even think. I ran. 10 minutes later, I found them exactly where he said, swinging and laughing under Clara's half-attentive watch. She saw my face, saw the panic, and didn't argue when I bundled them into the car and drove away. We stayed with her sister that night, the kids curled up next to me on the couch while I sat awake staring at the front door, the note on the back of my tongue like bile. I called Ryan Blake the next morning. Old Army buddy runs private security in Amarillo now. Ryan didn't waste breath telling me I was paranoid. He just told me to get the kids somewhere safe and sit tight. He'd handle the rest. 2 days later, Ryan and his crew had the creep. His name was Carl Jeffers, 42, living out of a rusted camper in the woods west of town. They found photos. Dozens. Me, my kids, even Clara. Police found shrines, scribbled notes, bits of our garbage locks of what might have been my daughter's hair taped to Polaroids. The Ash Hollow cops couldn't brush it off anymore. They dragged him away in cuffs while I stood behind the hardware counter, breathing sawdust and relief for the first time in weeks. Carl's locked up now. 5 years for stalking threats, all of it. But some nights when I'm stacking shelves alone after closing, I swear I still hear my cell phone ring even when it's not plugged in. And sometimes I think I see him just beyond the paint aisle, pale eyes gleaming under the hum of those old lights. Would you keep your store open after that? Tell me below. I'll be here listening in the dark. I moved back to Ridgemont after finishing college, mostly to help my dad after his second back surgery. It's the kind of town where the grocery clerk still calls you by your childhood nickname and your old teachers pretend they know exactly how you've turned out. That's probably why I didn't think twice when Mason Hale messaged me out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken since junior year, but he popped up like an old friend, said he'd seen me at the hardware store, and figured we should catch up, like old times, he wrote. Maybe I was lonely, or maybe I just wanted to feel like that part of my life wasn't entirely over. Either way, I said yes. We picked the small park behind the middle school, the one by the cracked tennis courts and the crooked swing set no one fixes anymore. It was late April, the breeze still sharp enough that I kept my jacket zipped to my chin as I pulled into the empty lot. Mason was already there, leaning against the splintered picnic table, his hands shoved into the pockets of a faded flannel. He looked almost exactly the same, buzzed hair, too wide grin, but there was something off in his eyes I couldn't pin down. We started with safe talk. Who'd moved away? Who'd married who? I could feel him eyeing the keys, half hidden in the sleeve of my hoodie. Just flicks of his gaze barely there, but enough that it lodged itself in the back of my mind. At some point, he pulled out a blunt pinched between two fingers like a casual dare. I laughed it off. At first, I hadn't smoked since my last semester, but he teased until I gave in. Just like senior year, he said. I told myself it was harmless, just enough to feel young again. It only took 3 drags before the edges of the world softened in a way that felt all wrong. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The dirt under my sneakers seemed to tilt with every blink. Mason's grin didn't slip once he just watched me too still. I tried to stand, but my knees gave a lazy protest. He slipped an arm under mine, too gentle. Let me drive you home. Can't have you like this behind a wheel. Before I could find the words to argue, he tugged the keys from my sleeve. My mouth moved, but the words came out slurred, not even words, really. He steered me to my old Civic like I weighed nothing. I remember the soft click of the locks the second he backed out of the lot. The windows were up tight, stale air mixing with the faint sweetness of my car freshener. I pressed my forehead to the glass, searching for streetlights, mailboxes, anything to ground me. But everything was melting together, dark shapes behind streaks of moving headlights. When we passed the main turn to my neighborhood, my heartbeat tripped. I reached for the door, but the handle wouldn't sit right in my palm. This isn't... I forced out. Mason didn't look at me, just drummed his fingers on the wheel. Shortcut. Don't worry. I tasted metal at the back of my throat. My phone, I reached for it in my pocket, but felt nothing. I knew I'd had it at the park. He must have seen me fumbling. You dropped it back there, I've got it. His voice was too calm, like he'd rehearsed it. The road narrowed to a strip of cracked pavement, hemmed by pine and oak branches clawing the car windows as we passed. No streetlights, no houses. Just the hum of tires over frost-buckled asphalt. I swallowed my panic in shallow breaths. tried to steady my hands on the seatbelt buckle. I asked for air, my voice small, strangled. He didn't answer. He just pressed harder on the gas eyes fixed dead ahead. When the curve hit, the car slowed barely. It was enough. I braced one hand against the door thumb, scraping the latch until it gave. Cold air exploded inside, sharp and stinging. Mason shouted something. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I threw myself out. Hit gravel shoulder first. The pain jolted everything clear for a heartbeat. My knees scraped raw when I scrambled off the road into the brittle underbrush. The car idled behind me, then a sudden growl of the engine. Then nothing. I lay hidden behind a toppled tree trunk, heart punching my ribs so loud it drowned out the wind. When I finally looked up, there was nothing but broken tire tracks and the rustle of dry leaves. I walked until my legs gave up, pretending they weren't shaking. Found a diner off Route 8 that still had its neon sign half lit. The cook let me use the landline while he refilled the salt shakers. My dad picked me up an hour later with a sheriff's deputy in tow. I told them everything, or what my rattled head could piece together. 2 days later, they found my phone in a ditch by the quarry. Mason never called me again, never got charged. Said I was just high, just paranoid. Ridgemont feels smaller now, like it shrank around me when I wasn't looking. The faces still smile. The old friends still wave. But I don't answer messages from people I barely remember, and I never park near that old picnic table again.